Hey guys, George Mesa, Third Eye Edify podcast. And I am so excited to have a local friend on who does some incredible work that I think you're all going to be very curious about. I'm here to learn, and I hope you are too. So please welcome my friend Astro Phil to the program. He's an astrocartographer and an astrologer at heart, and many other things, I'm sure. So let's let's get some insight into just what it is that you do, how it all started, and how much it impacts you and the people that you work with. I'm so excited to have you on. Finally, we've been talking about this for for months. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, George. I love your show and your book, and
Thank you
you
so
and your family are pretty darn cool.
much.
So it's nice to share some space here. What is it that I do? Uh, One thing that I like to think or say is it's always sunrise somewhere, right? So it's right now it's 12:21 p.m. where we are,
Right.
apparently, and the sun is rising somewhere. We could find out where. Um, and essentially, when you're born. Uh, Wherever you're born, whenever you're born, the sun is rising somewhere. And that the whole idea of astrocartography is just it's all astrology. But it's just a matter of like asking the question, what if you're born elsewhere at a different time? So uh, if you're born somewhere, if you're born in New York on maybe April 17th or something like that, uh, some year in the 80s, uh, and you're born at 4 p.m., there's a certain set of planets that are interacting in the sky, or not in the sky, invisible to us, below us in a way, that are interacting with the horizons at certain angles, maybe a 56-degree angle, with Mars. There's just like so many different potentials. But to break it down to like the basics, the sun is rising somewhere. So we ask the question, well, what if X person is born um, in Hawaii where the sun was rising at that moment? And what's the energy like for them there? If they were born there, how would their birth chart be different? And the concept is, well, if you were to live there, perhaps your life would mm, run its course in different ways. You would be the same person elementally. The same things are happening in the sky. Um, like your birth chart would still be your birth chart as the planets relate to one another in their positions within what they call the zodiac. But with the place, things are much different. And so, in a way, like we don't think about astrology or the birth chart commonly as a way of looking at your position at your moment of birth in space time, but that is what astrocartography does. It adds space, which is implicit. It's already there, actually. Astrocartography is not different than astrology,
Right.
it's the same thing. It's just we have, at this point, the ability to computationally make maps on demand of the earth, like at the moment of your birth, and read them in this way. Whereas back in the day, that would have taken a very long time, and we didn't have the mapping know-how or even the knowledge, supposed knowledge of what Earth was and how it was laid out and how it relates to the heavens, etc. So yeah, I mean, maybe that's a little bit convoluted or
It's a good place to start.
swaggy, but
It's a very good place to start, I think,
it's
because
much
you sort
easier
of
to illustrate, I feel, than it is to just speak about. 'Cause
good
It, it,
point. Good point.
it can feel abstract to speak about, but what I appreciate most about astrology is that to me it's quite physical. Um, I think of the planets as these physical bodies, and you and I are physical bodies, and we are all carrying time. We're all carriers and movers of time. So how are we interacting essentially? Not the planets seem to be quite large and maybe have a bigger impact on time and space time. Uh, so maybe they impact us more than we impact them. That's the idea. That's
That's
implicit. That really mostly unspoken.
very cool, man. Are you familiar with this book, the Dictionary of Astrology, 1819 from James Wilson?
No.
It's pretty massive, pretty crazy, and it talks about some of those things exactly. And
Oh,
it's
cool.
not the first. I mean, Manly P. Hall and others have all gone into the ideas of the body is represented in so many ways by the stars, but it's in there too. An official dictionary of astrology that's 200 years old at this point. Over 200 years old. This is not old information, and I think that's a lot of people have trouble getting around, especially whatever you want to call them, normies. I don't ever put them in that category, but the ones that they know but they don't want to admit it. I think it's the best way to approach them. They
Mm.
think they agree that this whole astrology thing is pseudoscience, and that astronomy is totally legit. Neil deGrasse Tyson side of the world, where he's saying Pluto's
Yeah.
dead. He's saying Pluto's not a planet. Meanwhile, I think that we can easily debunk that. But
Yeah,
let's
it's rather sad. They're really missing out, you know.
they're missing out on something, and they're all they want to really do, it seems, is just find a reason that it doesn't work. They're just looking for that. Meanwhile, they've never even tried it or given it the time of day, because it's witchcraft or whatever they want to call it. And I think we'll get into that maybe a little later, because that's a whole different topic. But let me ask you this, because I had this on my mind as I was making the outline, is that I'm a musician, but I call myself a bass player. I'm a bassist, is what I really am at heart. Do you
Okay.
find yourself in the same category? You're an astrologer, but you are an astrocartographer. Is it the same
Um,
idea, or is there a difference?
uh,
Are
that
you are
that
you a
brings the
specialist, in
question
other
to mind.
words?
Can you be so you can be a musician and a bassist?
Right.
Can you be a bassist and not be a musician?
No. Right.
So you can't be an astrocartographer without first being an astrologer. Now there are many people out there who think that they are astrocartographers who know nothing or very little about astrology.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, but it is the way it is in this day and age. Um, but I would say I even hesitate to use the word astrologer honestly because um, it's written people have a lot of associations with that word with
Right.
astrology, and a lot of people associate just when they think of astrology they think, oh, what's my sign,
Mhm.
uh, what's my sun, what's my moon, what's my rising sign. And for me, what I do, I will go through an entire reading without even mentioning those things because they're so surface level. um, what I see, like I'm a space-time diviner. That's my new that's my new
Wow.
term.
I'm
Uh,
writing that one
but
down.
uh, but most people would call me an astrologer, and I'm totally okay with that. I
Sure.
love,
Sure.
I love astrology and what I see as astrology. It's just that I've gotten to such depths with it that what I see as astrology is much different than what other people see as astrology. Just like you with music, I'm
This
sure.
happens with music too. It's the same exact thing. If
Yeah,
somebody plays a C sharp and I'm saying that's the third because it's the 5/7 of D major, like you can't just you hear one thing, you can find 10 things because of it, and because of the depth of studying, and it doesn't happen overnight. It's not through one book. It's not through one video. You have to live it. You
you
have
have
to
to live
actually
it.
live it,
Yeah,
right? And there's no there's no faking it. There's no faking any of this stuff. You need complete expertise, holistic expertise in every direction. If there's any holes in your pocket, it'll be obvious right away, and that can actually lead to what there is now, where you're saying there's people that aren't necessarily astrocartographers that are claiming to be. I'm sure it's TikTok or whatever you want to call it, and
yeah,
they may score a few hits here and there. If you play every note in one song, you're going to be right once in a while, or broken clock is right twice a day. But the depth is missing. The depth is missing the ability to listen to what someone has to say, and to cater to it through many clients, through all this other stuff. It's impossible. I've been teaching since 1997, so by that regard alone, I'm able to find expertise that I never would have had. For example,
right.
if I didn't hear question after question or see hand after hand doing all these things, it comes with time. It never happens overnight. So this, much like bass guitar, as a matter of fact, that is my primary instrument, this is not necessarily a very old version of astrology. This is relatively new, or at least the title of it being given to it is new. Do you agree with this? I'm just going with the information I found.
So the idea that one like that the birth chart changes with location is
Mm,
not new.
right.
But the idea of putting it on a map, drawing out a map, yes, that is relatively new. That was Jim Lewis, who first was the big promoter and perhaps inventor of that. I mean, there were other people involved, lots of people involved
Sure.
on his team. Um, and then getting it to be programmed into software and be able to put it on an older computer, that was a whole squad of genius people. Um, but yeah, the term astrocartography or the practice of locational astrology is new, just like it's new that I can, as an American, I can move across the country on a whim, like that. It's all quite modern,
Right.
and I question a lot of it, but it's here. I'm not necessarily participating at the moment, but it's here for sure.
Right. Right. That's great. The little things that I came across, there were two things that I never heard of. There's the United Astrology Congress in DC. Have you heard of this? I did not know this existed, and it came up because the the astrocartography trust that Jim Lewis established in the year 2000 applied for a trademark for astrocartography, and it
Hmm.
was granted and then canceled by the patent office in 2011, which I'm just not finding to be surprising at all because I have an older dictionary and it very obviously claims that astrology is a pseudoscience, and
Hmm.
every book I've read has proven the opposite to me personally. And my if anyone had seen me on Interverse about a year and a half ago, I guess I was going into detail about my musical zodiac, and right there's already this correlation that would easily prove its existence at the very least. And what I think really happens at the end of the day is it's a very, very, very deep learning curve to really master and establish it. You can't just know every constellation. You can't just know the planets. There's just so much to know. And perhaps this is keeping people away and they're just disregarding, like, this is ridiculous. Perhaps it's that at some level too.
You mean the like the dismissal of the patent and just the genuine or the overall dismissal of
Just like the
astrology as
public,
a
yeah, like the
fake?
yeah, like the recent boom in astronomy versus astrology from, let's say, Neil deGrasse Tyson and the other guy. I can't even think of his name right now.
Sagan, baby. Sagan.
Sagan. I
He's such a hater.
oh,
He's
it
so
hurts.
creative and magical in other ways.
I know. I found out about this book because of him. He mentions it in Demon Haunted World. And I said, oh, I'm going to check that out for sure. If it was a book this thorough, for him to say that this is people trying to ruin your life and act as demons is crazy to me. There's a very thorough study here. So just crazy. All right. Well, let's get a little insight. Can I actually, before we get there, why did this grab you the most? You were clearly studying astrology and perhaps even I'm using it to help people before you were an astrocartographer. I
Hmm.
could be wrong about that.
Hmm.
Why was this the thing that grabbed you? How
Well,
did
I
you
needed
choose
it,
that?
I think. I was deep in study,
Mm.
and I went to a presentation about this with this other astrologer named Philip. Actually, he was the presenter. This was in Virginia, and I was just like, "Oh, that's cool." And so I invested in some software that allowed me to kind of tinker around with it. And at the time, I was considering moving across the country from Virginia to Washington State, and I said, well, why don't we just like kick the tires on this thing and like see if it really works? And so a friend and I, who also was really into astrology, we traveled across the country and just kind of, traveled our lines. And um, I wound up in Washington and I just didn't feel like I thought it would. And I wound up in Minnesota after that, where I met my wife, and now we're here. But we used astrocartography in ways to rule out places where we could have tried to find a home. Um, it just once I picked the skill up, like you have to know astrology first, and so I had done the work there. But once I picked the skill up and people heard about it, it was just like something that was essentially called out of me more than me like being like, all right, this is who I am and this is what I want to offer. It
Right.
was like, well, this is actually everyone wants this from me. So I suppose that I'll just ride this. And that's what's happened. It's just I keep getting the requests, and so I answered the invitation. That's all that's happened really. Like I said earlier, I'm not a huge globalist or anything. I don't think that we should just be jet setting everywhere. I think there's a lot to tourism and a lot to travel and globalism that I find very questionable in their intrinsic value. But um, I do see through doing this work, there are people who are very prone to big adventures, to big moves, to leaving home, to deviating greatly from their lineage. I see it everywhere, and especially in America, we have millions of people whose ancestors left their ancestral homelands, thousands of years,
Right.
countless generations, and what that creates karmically is a restless soul, and that lasts 4 generations. And so, in America, especially, we are a country of restless souls, and people who really are trying to find belonging, trying to find home. Um, and it has kind of created this modern phenomenon, or it's co-created this modern phenomenon with a lot of other factors that astrocartography just happens to pop up with, and it provides insights and guidance, for people who want to be wise about making a big move, or even just like starting a business here, or
Mhm.
traveling here for a certain spiritual experience. Like there's many uses for it. Uh, I find mostly it happens with relocation in me, since for some reason my greatest success in my whole life was finding my home, and so I get to, I guess, spread the love in that way
How
for
wonderful.
people.
I also do my best to give my own wealth back to everyone deal with at a work level or at a life level. And it sounds like you're doing the
Hmm.
same, and that's great. And I can't help but think of this dink culture that they're labeling nowadays, double income, no kids. These are the ones that are doing all the
Oh
traveling
yeah.
like crazy,
Oh, I haven't heard that term.
Yeah, the dinks, man. So they
That's a
were,
great man. Thank you for that.
but that's what it is though. They're like, oh, well,
Yeah.
I work, we both work, we have no debt, we have tons of cash. It's great. I can do whatever I want for the rest of my life. Which is, you can do that with kids too. You just have to kind of sacrifice a few decades, whatever. But it's they're led by the hand though at the same time. If you picture in a cartoon when one of the characters is sitting there and the smell of food comes by, and then it kind of just guides them away and they float away towards the smell of the food, like they're guided towards this life. If they expect, especially if they really dive into the digital version of our culture, they don't have a choice almost. And they're
Yeah.
shown how wonderful things can be, and they get constant, wonderfully photoshopped images of everywhere but the USA, and they get to
Hmm.
think that everything's perfect everywhere else. But
Hmm.
we've got a lot of wonderful things here, big time, and
Hmm.
could even be the source of the things that people think come from other locations. The USA's got it. There's a lot of stuff hiding here, and
I agree.
perhaps you've come across that in your studies. And I'm wondering how the work of people like Michelle Gibson and others studying the ley lines, and I wonder if that relates to the lines that you deal with, because I came across, and just for the viewers to know, I'm as I say very often on this show, I am no expert in that. I've studied what I quickly could before having you on. I'm here to learn, and I hope that the viewers are too. As I said earlier, I came across 44 lines that go across the map. Is that the numbers that you use? Is that right? Did I find somebody else's information? I don't know anything about it. How this all works?
So I showed you a very basic map
Yes.
earlier, and that's going to have those 44.
Okay.
I
So it
use
is
over
kind of
1200.
wow. What are
So
these numbers? What is the 44? What is there a rhyme and a reason? Are
it's
they
11 times
equidistant?
4.
Oh, okay. So are they equidistant, or is it just in certain places?
They're not equidistant, or they shouldn't be, unless there's some perfect moment in time. But they're all according to where the planets are in relationship to Earth at the moment of birth, or the moment of the casting of the chart.
Okay.
So there are no two maps that are the same.
Oh,
It
okay. The
just as there are no
lines.
two birth charts that are the same, just as space-time never repeats itself.
Beautiful, beautiful. So the 44 lines are in different. It's always 44, but they're not in the same place for everybody. Is that right?
Yeah, or 1280.
Wow. Big numbers, man. No, this is great. This proves the depth of it and why
Yeah.
I'm sure it's as effective as it is. That's really cool, man. So, and maybe before you show an example, the other part of this that I came across is that there's an orb of influence, which reminds me of
Mhm.
sphere of influence culturally. If you
Mhm.
study history, you get the same term, you know.
Yeah.
Um, does that have a definitive size, or and what is the orb of influence? How does that work in your readings?
You know, astrology is I can see why they call it a pseudoscience because we have a fishy task, and that is to quantify magic.
Yeah,
So to quantify the unquantifiable. So something like an orb of influence. So say there's a line that goes over New York
yeah,
that shows that the sun was rising right through New York City when you were born. That line has an orb of influence that may stretch to 200 to 250 miles in either direction coming off the line. That's what I would say.
right.
Um, and it's not going to be the only line in the vicinity at all. So it's going to be competing with a lot of other lines, or not competing, but rather like
Yeah,
co-creating an experience with a lot of other lines. Um, but a line such as the sun rising or Venus rising, Saturn rising, those are the strongest lines. Like those lines that are indicating a planet is making a direct action on Earth at that moment. It's rising or it's setting. They're going to have the biggest orb, 250 miles is where I draw it,
hmm.
which is rough,
Yeah,
definitely. And then you'll get different lines with smaller orbs, like, oh, well, this is a 72-degree angle. This is Mars at a 72-degree angle with the rising point, with the eastern horizon. So that is a very specific energy of like a nonlinear work pattern that's somewhat ambitious, um, and finds its way to do the work that it wants to do, but in a very creative and non-linear way. Um, that's going to have, because it's more subtle, it's going to have a smaller orb. So I would put that at like 150 miles
uh,
tops.
I
And
see.
then, so that 72 degrees is 1/5 of 360, right?
Right,
So that's what we call a quintile or a fifth. So that's the fifth harmonic. So then I could say, well, what about the ninth harmonic? So Mars in a 40 degree, or 40 is 1/9 of 360. So Mars in a 40-degree angle is going to have a smaller orb.
right.
And as I keep going, the fraction keeps going higher, the orb gets smaller.
Sure.
So essentially, a conjunction, or the sun on the rising point, is a conjunction that's going to have the biggest orb. And as the fraction gets smaller, the orb gets smaller too. But the fact that the orb is small doesn't mean that it's less powerful. You can be right next to it, and it can be the most powerful line because you're 200 miles from the strong line, but you're dead on, just like the subtle line, you know.
Right, because you showed me there's more lines if you get a more detailed version of what you're
Mhm.
looking at.
Yeah.
And that's the 44 versus 1280, I assume,
Yes.
at its heart. Yeah, right. So
Yes.
now you spark something. As my listeners know,
Ta-da!
yeah, really, man. As my listeners know, I'm on the hunt for things, especially after my last interview with Stephanie McPeak Peterson. We were really getting into overtone series and the partials that rise through the octaves as as you get smaller and smaller, essentially
Mhm.
through the partial through the from the fundamental and rising in the overtone series. How familiar are you with the overtone series of any pitch? Because
Oh
you
man,
described
I
one.
listened to that one. That one was badass. But I was gardening at the time, so it was I'm not very familiar, but I tried to become familiar through the conversation. I felt like I was grabbing it, but I would love for you to give me a synopsis.
Well, you just kind of discussed it. You said that this would be the fifth harmonic, for example, right?
Uh-huh.
So if we're looking at, let's say, the overtone series of a pitch, let's say you have your fundamental pitch, which let's just call it C. If I play a C, right? The next, the first harmonic is going to be the octave. The next one's going to be the fifth. The next one's going to be another octave. Then we get um, the third, the fifth, and the seventh, and back to an octave again. So within the first few partials, we get a chord essentially. So by saying fifth harmonic, I would place it now as like the third of the chord, for example, which really defines the chord actually. So very interesting that there could be a relationship there. the difference in the orb sizes relating to the how far we are up in the harmonic series from the fundamental, which could be the sun sign, perhaps. Oh, oops. Perhaps the sun sign would be the fundamental in this case. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm going to make some stuff when we're done, sometime the next week and kind of like flesh it out because I got ideas now, man. This is so cool. This is so
Interesting.
cool. Yeah,
I'm
very
thinking too
interesting.
of a fretboard right now.
Yeah,
Like, so obviously the first fret's the biggest. As
right.
you go up the neck, they get smaller and smaller and smaller,
That's
right?
right.
There's less
Yep.
space.
Yep.
The note is distinct nonetheless and significant, but the space is smaller. And that's
Right.
kind of like the orb of influence.
Same exact idea. Yep. And in that case, you're changing the fundamental each time you fret, new fundamental each time. And with the overtone series, the fundamental remains, and its partials create the note, and that's where they you rise through the overtone series. So this is cool, man. This is going to lead to other things. It's not the this isn't the last time you're going to be on this
It
show.
doesn't stop.
No, no, it doesn't really stop, does it? But the relationships are these are the relationships that should be made when we really learn music. When you read, let's just say the quadrivium or anything along the lines of the great masters, typically written in Latin or German or something along those lines, the Greek stuff, they all know this. Even if they're not, musicians, they are taught these things. These are fundamental, to repeat that word again. These are fundamental, basic, the seven liberal arts. I mean, this is what they taught. This is what
Hmm.
everyone knew that could live in that world, that could afford that life. Maybe that's a secular versus a sacred conversation. That's a whole different world. But you were taught these things as if it was the most important stuff: geometry, fundamentals of music, overtones. How
Hmm.
frequency works. And your term was you had your own. It was a very relevant term. I forgot what you said earlier before we recorded. Um, doesn't
Me
matter.
too, I guess.
Yeah, it's all right. So these are the fundamentals of our existence, and you're tapping into it here at a astrological level. But what's above, what's below, because you're truly existing in the what as above so below in a certain way, because you're discussing the ground under your feet and of course the heavens above you. So I think that's one of the most legitimate things I've ever heard, man. It's really cool what you do. I love it. And it
You do
may
it too.
well we got you ever
We're
we
all
got
doing it, whether we know it or not.
well that's very true, and we're really trying to find something here, and most importantly is that we've successfully avoided the trap of what they try to raise us to be, as far as like Department of Education and just
Mhm.
just entertainment in general. We've obviously avoided the trap. We're not like some don't know like anything about the world that we lived in for the past whatever years. We're humans. We're surrounded by things. We know things, but we know better than to fall into the traps that they set for us. And now we can give back to the whole world at large through these gifts that we've trained very hard to have. They didn't come to us in a dream overnight. Again, to remind. So before you give, I think it'd be really good to give an example as best as you can. But before that, I also came across the term natal promise. And I was just wondering how much the natal charts factor into what you do, or do natal charts represent anything? As if you can you look at a natal chart and get your information, or you need to go to your program and do the astrocartography completely separate? Do they
It's
inform
all
each other?
it's all the natal chart.
It's all natal chart.
It's all natal chart. That's all it is.
So
So
it's a different representation of it. Is that what you're saying? Like a more
yeah,
detailed representation?
it's just a physical, like it's like a space related.
Uh,
So there before there was the map, there was the relocated chart. So
mhm.
it's just okay, your birth chart
Yeah.
has you have to know where you were born as well as the minute you were born,
Hmm.
right? And what for astrocartography to work, you really need to know within 4 minutes of exactly when you were born. Uh, about I
Right.
would prefer the minute, right? I would prefer the
Sure.
second,
Oh,
but
sure. Yeah.
that's not really possible. I tried that with my daughter's birth; it didn't work out.
It's hard to catch the second.
It's
Yeah.
hard to catch that. Um, anyway, there was the relocated chart, which is just answering that same question. Okay, you're born in New York. This is the way your birth chart looks. The sun is 60 degrees from the rising point. Okay, well, what's it look like if you're born in Colorado Springs? Oh, okay, that's much different. The sun hasn't even risen yet. So we look at the sun's relationship there, or all the planets' relationships there, with the rising, the setting, what we call the midheaven, or the zenith of the chart, or the root and the base, like the very root of the chart. Those are the
Mhm.
four angles of the chart. It sounds silly to say angles when you're talking about a circle, but that's the terminology.
No, I
Um,
like that a lot
it
actually.
it makes four quadrants in a circle,
Mhm.
essentially. So um, we just say, well, okay, let's cast the chart for a different place at the same time. And all that astrocartography is doing is showing you, or all that the map is doing is showing you in a much easier to digest form how the energy shifts. And you can look at the whole world at one time, with a big map.
Oh, I see. The
So
natal chart focuses on your exact spot. Is that the biggest difference there?
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
So it technically I could like with the software like look at a map of the whole world and just click like, okay, show me the natal chart for Toledo, Ohio. Click Toledo, Ohio. Natal chart pops up if you were born there. Okay, that one looks like crap. Show me the natal chart for um, Corpus Christi, Texas. Oh,
Right.
that looks better. Like it obviously it's more nuanced than that, but
Sure.
that's the concept is it's all based on the natal chart. You can't have it. You can't have astrocartography without the natal chart. That's why I say there is no astrocartography without astrology. It's just like a branch of it or like a little special division of it.
Well, it seems very focused, and it also seems like it takes a lot of time compared to, let's say, like your average tarot slash astrology reading, where, back in the day, I mean, it was just in the newspaper, like, hey, if here's what's going to happen to you today, if you're a Libra, don't leave the house. And now, and tarot readings, they can be brief if they need to be, but this seems like there's no way of this being brief. Is that correct? I mean, you got to spend some
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Uh, so for instance, like a client will request me to look at like one place for them and make a video. That's a
Right.
service I offer. So I'll do that. Typically, it'll be about 20 minutes, yeah,
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's
per
that's
place. And
replace.
if somebody wants like the full scale reading, then it could last, a couple hours if they have a lot of places they want to look at.
Are
Or it
you,
could last a couple hours if they have two places they want to look at in great depth and like
if you
really
want to go?
converse about it.
Sure, sure, sure. Is tarot a factor in any of this at all?
Um, I think tarot is very legitimate. I don't understand it. It's not my specialty at all.
Right.
And no, I'd say no, it's not a factor in
Not a
this,
factor at all. Okay,
but
okay.
but I think it's legit. I think you could ask the same questions in a tarot divination and get legitimate answers, maybe with less specificity or nuance.
Well,
Maybe more. There are different
you
different specialties,
it's
man.
it's entirely possible. And I will say why, because I have a friend who's been on this show a few times, Slick Dissident. And he's
Oh yeah, I've heard him on your show.
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's something, man. And he has
Yeah.
created a map of the United States that has the tarot spread out in it in the
Oh,
places that he
cool.
believes them. Like, for example, right where we are in Kentucky, he has the Fool. It's like the beginning of everything, and everything revolves around this location. So very interesting stuff, man. Very, the devil is right in Florida, right where the triangle is, the Bermuda Triangle, for example. So I think you guys could actually sync up in that regard, and maybe
Uh-huh.
see. I'd love to have you both kind of canoodle in the, hey, my tarot's here. What are you seeing? Very cool, man. Very cool. So all right. So and now I'll make sure he knows that he was mentioned now in this episode. So let me ask you this before I really do want you to actually give us a physical example, because I think people would really gain from seeing how the process works. It
Mhm.
looks like this program is the best use of Visual Basic I've ever seen. Almost makes me wish I continued my computer science studies.
Oh,
But
cool.
because this is what this is all about. This was a good reason to use it. Um, can you do this with? You mentioned people and maybe locating a business, but can you look at Amazon and check out like their natal chart slash astrocartography thing? And can you guide businesses that are already existing
Yeah, if you have a time and date
if you
in
have a
place
time and
of
date?
registration. Yeah.
Right. I
So
wonder.
if you have like global um visions. Maybe you're a
Right.
Bezos Junior.
Right.
You could say, "Hey, Phil, where should I promote? I'm not tied to any location. Like, where should I set up this or that operation?" Then we could find certain energies. Oh, wow, that's really good for you in Melbourne. That's strange. I wouldn't have
Right.
thought that.
Right.
But yeah, you can get really specific about really different tasks that you'd like to undertake in certain locations for sure.
Interesting. I had another question that I didn't. I know I shared the outline here, but I think there's plenty that's not on here. Are there dead zones? Are there certain spots that have just never come up, or is it impossible to make that judgment?
The only reason that they haven't come up is because people haven't asked me about them. I mean,
Mm.
so somebody will say, I want to know about the whole world. Like, what are the best places for me in the world? And I'll be like, well, let's get real here because are you really gonna go to Uzbekistan if I tell
Right.
you that it's really strong there for you? And then be like,
Right.
okay, well, I'm actually disinterested in North and South
Now that you
America.
say that, yeah, yeah. And a little
Like,
bit of
what
Europe
is
and
the
some of
world?
Asia. Right, right. A little bit of Asia, a little bit of Europe, and most of North and South America, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe a tiny bit of Australia. Because I'm, like Northeast Canada, like it looks like a complete dead zone. Like that. Most people just can't live there, for example. But it's huge, you know, things of
It's
that nature.
massive.
It's massive.
Astrocartography actually becomes less functional the closer you get to the North and South poles. And you'll see that with the map. The lines get super dense. Um,
Ah.
there's different horizons there, and the planets interact in different ways with the horizons there.
So it makes sense
And
based on what humans can endure as far as living locations. It actually works out that way.
I mean, I'm not saying humans can't endure those
Right.
locations,
Right.
but the average person, yeah, wants to live in a more comfortable place.
Hmm. Interesting.
And it's much more applicable there. The horizons just they move so quickly. In like northern Sweden, it's just I would need to know your birth time down to as yeah, the second basically, if you're super high or super low
Interesting.
for it to really
Is it because of the
make
shape?
sense.
Is it because of its shape? It's the lines just pass right through it.
The shape of
You said Sweden, right?
well, just because it's so far north.
Oh,
Um,
because it's getting close
and
to the.
so the
I see. I see.
experience of the horizons up there is completely different than what you and I are familiar with.
Yes, I see. I see. Wow. Interesting. All right. Cool. 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 All right. Cool. No pun intended. So let's show us something. Pull it up. Let me see. Let's see how this whole thing works because I'm fascinated by this, man. It's so
Okay,
cool.
George. Let's have a look.
Yeah.
Uh, Okay, so you see a birth chart.
Right.
Yes, you see it?
Yes. Oh, and I see the name up there too. Very cool.
Mr. Tesla.
The one and the
Uh,
actual Tesla, real Tesla.
okay, so here's the deal. Birth chart's a circle. Um, Tesla's born July 10th, 1856. I rectified his time to 12:08. It's officially listed as noon, but that's
Mm,
rarely correct.
I see.
But that's from an autobiography. It's like he's born around noon.
Right.
So uh, here he is, taking his first breath. He's in the very center of the wheel. Okay.
Mm, mhm.
There's an axis that flows left to right horizontally across the chart. That depicts the horizons of Earth, the eastern horizon and western horizon. Okay. So this is the east over here. This is what they call the rising.
Mhm.
This is the west over here. This is what they call the setting. So anything above that axis is in the sky at that moment. Okay.
Right.
Uh, as it happens, he was born pretty damn close to perfect noon, like local perfect noon in Smiljan, Croatia. Uh, and so the sun is right at the peak of the chart.
Mhm.
There's this dotted line right here, and that represents what we call the midheaven, or the zenith. So every planet travels in an arc in our sky, from east to west. It has a point where it's neither going up nor going down. It is at its peak, and that's what we call the midheaven or the zenith. So every planet has a moment of the day where it's at its own personal noon. As it happens, Tesla was born at noon, so the sun was at the zenith.
Mhm.
Um, and it has its opposite down here, the root of the chart. which if you were born at midnight, the sun would be here. Okay, so those are the four angles of the chart. You see there's lots of lines in the center of the chart. Those are illustrating certain geometric relationships between planets. Um, and I just posed the question. I know that he had like a setup in New York and he
Right.
had a setup in Colorado Springs,
Sure.
right? So let's look at Colorado Springs, Colorado Springs, Colorado. So this is the relocated chart. This is not the map yet, okay?
Right.
Okay, so nowhere near where he's born.
Hmm.
Uh, the sun has not come up yet. Here it is.
Right.
All the lines, all these geometric relationships between the planets are all the same. The planets aren't they aren't changed in their position
Right.
in like in the sky, like in the greater sky. But from his perspective, they are
Right.
because the sun hasn't come up yet. Jupiter's pretty high. Neptune is actually very close to the midheaven in Colorado Springs. And so all these symbols are glyphs of planets and asteroids. Anyway, this is a very different vibe here. Very different vibe. So Neptune plays into a really strong sacred geometric structure in his chart that's super specific. It's about being an incredible visionary um, and just having visions of just a totally new way of doing things and never before way of doing things. A very rare structure in his chart involving Uranus, Pluto, Jupiter, and Neptune. You can see there's this like little X right here between them
Yes.
actually. And that rarely happens. It's going to happen again for the first time since then, next year actually. So little baby Tesla is going to be born again, maybe. But anyway,
That the article you had sent me has to do with that?
it's part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a variation of the pattern. Yeah. Um, yeah, Neptune is at the midheaven here. So let's look at it on a map. Okay, so this map is gonna show, let's just do a basic map of the world.
Okay.
This tells me where planets are, and this is the 44
The
lines. Okay.
44. Yes, that's what I was going to ask. Sure.
This shows me where planets and the sun and moon are making actions, either rising, setting
Hmm.
on the midheaven or on the root.
So yeah,
So
like
here's where it was noon. This is where he was born, right along this line in Croatia, right here.
yeah.
Okay. Uh, here's where he wound up, where Neptune was at the midheaven. Okay. So
Right.
Colorado Springs is like right here, pretty close to that. We could dive in, and this is where, I mean, we could go anywhere. We could go anywhere. There's some really significant energy actually in New York as well,
Yeah, I
but
was going to ask why the line is thicker there. Is there two?
it's
That's two
because
lines.
there's two lines that are one on top of the other.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
see that.
he
I
was
see.
born with the moon and Mars right next to each other in the sky.
Right, because I actually grew up right next to Wardenclyffe Tower in Wading River, New York, on Long Island. I was one town over from there. That's where I would generally grew up. Yeah, I was born in New York, in Queens, New York, closer to where he was in the city. But
Uh-huh.
I ended up living most of my life where he was, like right over there. Really cool.
So you can actually see it a little bit if you look for it here. But there's a really particular line going through Long Island that's not shown here because it's so specific. If I say
Mm.
here's Jupiter, here's Pluto, where do they meet in the middle? It's right
Oh,
here.
is
If I
that a
say here's
midpoint?
Neptune, here's Uranus, where do they meet in the middle? Hey, it's the exact same spot that Jupiter
Wow.
and Pluto meet at. So it's these four planets all meeting up. They're all sharing what we call an isosceles trapezoid or an isotrap in the birth chart. They essentially they share this middle point, and it's a
Right.
convergence of four planets and their energies, and they combine together to create a very specific signature that is on the midheaven
Right.
in New York. So it's like both of the places, Colorado Springs and New York, that he chose to spend the greater part of his career and do all of his creative works and inventions, etc., had really strong signatures for the imagination, for being visionary, for creating a new world. um, just on the very surface alone.
Yeah. Right.
So, but if I were to go and say, give me some more detail, um, just to show everybody,
Let me ask you this. If he came to you, you would have told him to go to these places. Is that right?
I would have urged him, urged him to go to New York.
Wow. Wow.
Uh, but I don't know that a lot of other workers would have
Well,
because it's a
it's
particular thing that I do.
it's very possible that he talked to someone just like you. I mean, it's not out of the
He
question, right?
probably figured the shit out
He
himself.
probably did it all by himself. Yeah.
Okay, so now we're looking at Colorado. Here's
Yeah.
Colorado Springs, and you can see here's the one line that we were looking at,
Mhm.
Neptune on the midheaven,
Right.
and along with it there are quite a few others. Um, so essentially, my job is to synthesize all
Yeah.
these energies and create a picture for you. Um, some of them have, like we said earlier, like bigger orbs. Some of them have smaller orbs,
Right.
but it's a great convergence and stew of energies, and it could be overall positive, overall negative. I hesitate to really push in one way or the other. Um, but I do just like to speak to the nuance. I see a good degree of mental activity here, in addition to like the imagination being just absolutely lit up here, maybe even too lit up.
Wow.
It's
Well, I
like
mean, that would make sense for him.
a lot of ideas just don't come to fruition here.
Right.
Uh, but nonetheless, there are a lot of visions and ideas. Maybe they come to better fruition in New York. You get more backing there. But yeah, he did like kind of peter out and run out of funding, right?
Well, it's possible that he was drained on purpose. I mean, try to
Yeah, yeah,
almost
totally.
burn him out of his own spot, literally.
Yeah.
So maybe some people are on the same information and realize that he can't be here. There's no way you can be here right now. You have to
Hmm.
go. We can't have you we can't have you have everyone return to all the things that we already knew. We can't have that, basically in a certain respect. So let me ask you this now. I think another question that's coming up for me, and I don't even know if this is a factor, is are you able to say you need to get here between the ages of 25 and 30? Is that part of this or no?
Love it. Love it. Okay. So yes, right? This is just space. We're just looking at space right now, but
Sure.
it's space time. We're talking about
Yes.
space time, baby. So
Mhm.
there's a whole nother and we got it rolling. We got it rolling.
This program is
So
called Sirius, by the way.
yeah, this program is called Sirius, like the constellation.
Yeah,
It is the best, absolutely the best astrological software that you can buy.
it looks very
It's
detailed.
extremely thorough. The people who make it are top flight research astrologers who they make my life a lot easier. They
I'm
make a lot of our
sure.
lives a lot easier.
Yeah,
How accessible this is just incredible, and people have dedicated their lives to the software.
I can see that.
Um, I'm glad you can see it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Now we're gonna go into the other main avenue that we take with these readings. So
Right.
you recognize that its inner circle is the relocated chart of Nikola Tesla to Colorado Springs.
Right.
The outer circle is where the planets sit at this very moment in relationship to the uh, relocated natal chart. So let's say he was born with the sun right here, okay?
Mhm.
18 degrees Cancer. The sun goes around his natal chart once a year and comes back on his birthday, once every 365 days or 360 degrees of the wheel. Um, the moon does it once a month or, 29 and a half days.
Mhm.
Here's the moon when he's born. It's gone around quite a few times since he was born.
Right.
Um, Saturn. Saturn takes 30 years. So here's Saturn when Tesla's born. It goes around every 30 years. It's still been around quite a few times. And now it's right here. Um, and a planet like Uranus takes about 88 years. So as I go further from Earth, the synodic cycle of the planet gets longer.
Right.
And that means that as these planets move around his chart or anyone's chart, um, the slower the moving planet, the longer lasting the impact that it has on a given degree. So all of these degrees are very significant. And if Uranus is at a significant degree for a person, then it's going to be there for, a year and a half, probably. Pluto, even longer. Pluto takes
Right.
248 years to go around the wheel. It was last where it is today in 1776. That's how long it takes. So, um,
Revolution. Huh?
yeah, yeah, something was going down, and it's
Whoa.
back, baby.
And it's back.
It's back. It's back. Lord of the Underworld is back. So, yeah, essentially, we would say, okay, let's find a place where, oh, you want to go somewhere to focus and just like really dive into your study, dive into your destiny, and um, not get a lot of interference. Then we would find a place where maybe Saturn was doing an activity at the moment of your birth, or a place where Saturn is doing an activity now. Say, I want to live somewhere for 2 years just to focus,
Mhm.
but I don't want it to be like super hard. Then
Right.
we would find a place where Saturn, okay, so maybe Saturn is at the degree of the midheaven, in Topeka, Kansas, right now for you, Nicola. Let's go to that degree. Let's move you to Topeka for 9 months and just have you do a deep dive because Saturn's all about just focus, permanence, integrity, strength, endurance. Like it's just boom, let's lock in. So, yes, we can use time and space to figure it out. Um,
Wow.
and often what you'll find is that when people are working with me, they'll really be curious about a place that has, for instance, a Saturn energy for them when
Right.
they're already going through a Saturn time in their life. Like they want to gravitate to that energy that's already pulling them in time. They want to gravitate to it in space as well. And so, we'll question around that. Like, is that really a good idea? Do you really want to turn that up to 11 right now?
Right. Right.
Or do you really want to turn up to 11? Okay, well then that's your life. Like, let's do it.
Then you got the answer, or at least some very good guidance. I mean, they still have to pull
Guidance.
through. They still have to pull through and do it.
Yeah, that's the hardest part for sure.
Well,
We do the dreaming together. That's the fun part.
that's good. I like that. Well, you offer inspiration on top of other things too. You can say, yeah, it's possible. Just do it here
Mhm.
at this time. So all this is a big factor. Very cool. Great to
Yeah,
see.
man.
Great choice on Nikola Tesla. So everyone can kind of have a base understanding of the magnitude of what you're looking at here.
I've got a video somewhere on my website, which is outofboundsastrology.com, of me doing like a reading for Walt Disney,
Right.
and his like the two like LA and Orlando.
In Orlando. And it makes
I
sense.
just felt oh yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Wow.
But I just felt like he's like a well-known guy, you know. He would apply to a lot of different audiences. Just he's
Amazing.
still got his fingers all over the place.
Well, it seems like it. Yeah, man. They're sticky, sticky fingers, man.
Yeah.
I so that's even that might be even more profound proof for anyone because Tesla is still you say Tesla and some people actually think Elon Musk at this point. So I think that this is the Disney thing, the location of the Disneylands that we know so well, not there's other ones, but the two big ones,
Yeah.
showing someone
Oh, the
these
other ones pan out
locations
too, man. The
and
other
the
ones
other ones
pan
pan
out
out
too.
too.
Yeah.
What Japan and what's the other? What are the just maybe Australia? I don't remember where the other ones is.
I just remember Japan. I think Paris, though.
Paris. That would
I
make
believe it's
sense.
Paris. Yeah.
I assume anywhere that's had a World's Fair can have a Disney World at this point. So I think, and and maybe you feel the same way that they were obviously in touch with and finding out about these energies and doing things accordingly, not just randomly choosing a place where tons of hurricanes and stuff, like Florida. Why put it there?
Yeah.
It unless you fly, it's not the most accessible part of the country. It's not a central
Yeah.
location
Yeah.
by any means. It's practically in another country. Um,
Yeah.
so that's it. That's the proof. I would say that first of all, it's not pseudoscience, and that people were indeed using this stuff a very long time ago and centuries before. I think that's the proof. That's good proof, man.
It's it's anecdotal.
Right.
It's anecdotal proof. But I will say, working with a lot of folks, a lot of people are intuitively asking me about places that are really good for them that they would have never been to. They're like, I've got a feeling about this place.
Yeah.
Or like this place I've noticed that this pattern, like it's always it keeps coming up. And we investigate it and we find out what's going on there, and often there's something quite significant.
And it looks good.
So
Yeah.
we've got these awesome pseudosciences like astrology just rolling along, but also we're magical.
Yes.
Like it's just nice to have the affirmation. I feel like that's one of the main medicines of astrology is that sense of affirmation that you get from it. Like, okay, here's this entire complex system that's actually affirming my magical system that I,
Wow.
it's unquantifiable. I can't explain it, but I have
Sure.
this
Sure.
intuition.
Oh, that's great. I love it, man. I think that's a good spot to chop off the first part here because I want to save a few questions for you in what
Okay,
I doubt it'll be as long as the second half, but I definitely I got a lot of questions that I didn't realize I had at first. And
let's
some
do it.
it's pretty cool, man. So wait, do me a favor, get this off the screen for a second because I think you're
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah.
you speaking of magical, I mean you're the process overall. It's funny how unmagical magic can be sometimes, and it really just comes from work. But then there's the idea that somebody knew before they even saw the chart. That is very magical. We are magical, and we really do have all these innate abilities to sense what the world is trying to tell us. It's all here, and maybe it's coming from above. Maybe it's coming from the stars half the time. Who knows? I mean,
Who
it could be
knows?
coming from the ground too, but it seems like there's been a large effort to remove things like very large bells and stuff that were rebelling the earth almost and just kind of getting the energies back that were lacking.
What are
And
you talking about? What? These bells?
yeah, there's a lot of bells. Bell towers are all missing their bells, and all these huge bells were like implanted into the ground as if to deliver the frequency. When you hear a big bell, it doesn't really sound like much because our ears can't take that, but the ground can take it. And where we're standing, where we live on, is ready to receive frequencies all the time, much like pyramids may have done too. And
Yeah.
they seem to be on very important lines, ley lines, so to speak. And there seems to be a large hint at to what we need and where our energies come from and how the world really works. And Tesla seemed to be a big part of that. He seemed to know about where certain, eclipses were going to happen. And he was near Stony Brook University and Brookhaven Lab, which are on Long Island. And there's a Hadron Collider there. He knew. And Niagara Falls, he had some station in Niagara Falls.
Oh wow.
Like, yeah, so he was ready. He had the aquifer at Wardenclyffe Tower. It was modeled like a pyramid. There was running water underneath. And he was in touch with it more. And I think he's remembered for that. He's remembered for being someone who is so innately in touch with what was already there. He was taking the gifts that were already there, as opposed to, let's say, Einstein, who's just trying to confuse a lot of people with math and stuff. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it. It's, geez, Penrose, Roger Penrose, he's got this math that only a few people can sit there and be like, I think that's great. I think it is. I don't know. I mean, it's just ruining people, And this is not necessarily complex math. You're just following a path and making sure you analyze properly, plugging in the right stuff, and understanding the planets and the way they travel. It's very useful math, if you want to even call it that. I don't want to call it that.
I'd say it's
Um,
geometry,
it's
basically.
geometry,
Yeah.
exactly. And yes, clearly there can be maths applied to geometry, but it's better to know what dodecahedron is and what it can do for you in a setting like this, as opposed to, you know, being able to do algebra or something like that. It doesn't really apply. So yes, geometry seems to be more important. And as far as things again like the quadrivium, geometry seems far more important than understanding some high level math that can help you program a video game. It's not the same thing. And this is not pseudoscience. This is every time something is discussed or shown in this light, it proves it. It proves how impactful this can be, and how much your inner soul tells you things, and then this can actually prove it. It's like proving like a math proof. Like, did this equation work? Yes, it did. Check this out. And you're guiding people along the way. It's so cool, man. And I appreciate what you're doing. It is awesome. And my wife had a reading with you. I will have a reading soon. I haven't had the chance to even sit down lately, and I hope to do that like
Take
after
your
the.
time. Take your
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Well, I've got a baby coming in, who knows, 2 week or two, and after that calms down, I'll have some time to really sit down, and it's gonna be really cool, man. So please let everyone know how they can obtain you and your services, what your website is again, and any other things that you might want to mention about how to find you.
Well, yeah, the website is outofboundsastrology.com. I stay pretty far away from uh, any of the socials and things like that. I try to live a very tactile, physical life to balance out all the cosmic stuff that I
Mm-hmm.
do.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, you can find me there. Um, that's where you can request a reading with me, or I make a video for you or something like that.
cool.
It's pretty explanatory. Once you get there, you'll see me.
Excellent. Well, that link will certainly be in the show notes for sure. And
Many thanks.
all the supporters, get ready for part two. I have a few more very interesting questions that I've completely avoided up until now. And it's been a joy to talk to you so far about all this stuff, man. I love getting insight into what you do, and seeing the examples really, I think, will help me and other people see exactly how far it can go, and how we did so much by doing so little so far. I know we didn't go that crazy, and we really got to see a lot just now. It was really cool.
It's already the best interview I've done. Like the where
Wonderful.
the person was present and knowledgeable and capable of just wonderful. Thanks, man.
Cool. All right. All
Super
right.
pumped for getting into the weeds with you here.
Yeah. Yeah. No, same here, man. All right. All right, guys. We'll see you in part two.